Welcome to one of our workshops offered by the University of Kentucky in our Work-Life Benefits Office. Today, we're going to be talking about successful workplace accommodations, and we have three representatives here from our University of Kentucky Human Development Institute. We have Haley Potter, Glen Jennings, and Bailey Patterson. Thank you so much, guys, for being with us and for sharing with us today.
Thank you. So we'll do quick introductions of ourselves. I'm Haley Potter. I'm an administrative research assistant at the Human Development Institute. And I do a bunch of different projects. I'm mostly kind of doing like administration as my title would entail. And my, I guess, interest in the disability community is mental health conditions and the arts, especially performing arts. And I guess I should have said this at the beginning. My pronouns are she, her. And then I will let Glenn introduce himself next.
All right. Good afternoon, y'all. My name is Glen Jennings. I am communication specialist at HDI, which if you look at our blog, I'm the one who writes a lot of those articles. So I am involved with a lot of different communication work and things like that. My pronouns are he, him. For a quick visual description of me, I am a 30 something white man wearing a cream colored sweater. I've got brown hair, cut relatively short, and a red beard. Um, and for where I am interested in disability, I first started with autism advocacy all the way back when I was in high school, and kind of branched out as I learned more and more about how the disability field in general is all kind of interconnected. Um, so yeah, Bailey, you're up.
My name is Bailey Patterson. I'm a student assistant at HDI. Pronouns are she, her. A visual description is that I'm a young woman with a pink sweater. And I work on projects including Stigma Silence, Story Spoken, the mental health podcast. And I've worked in the past on Disabled Playwrights Workshop and with Merge, dealing with developmental disabilities and mental health.
Right, thank you. So as a quick agenda, we'll go over what a workplace accommodation is, and then talk about equal versus equitable support in the workplace. And then we'll talk about managing fairness. And then we'll finish up with kind of a guided discussion because of course we want to hear from you all. So first up, what is a workplace accommodation? And so under the ADA, an accommodation is a modification to the work environment or the way an essential job function is performed. And this could be lots of different kinds of accommodations. And we're, of course, going to get into that. It can be something as expensive as putting in an elevator, or yeah, an elevator, or it can be as simple and as light covers on your on the like super bright lights in an office space. And of course, like I said, we'll kind of talk about what that kind of means person to person and lots of examples and things like that. And then accommodations under the ADA. Oh, and I should say this, the ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And under that, it means an accommodation must be reasonable and not cause undue hardship to the employer. So I mentioned an elevator. Those are very, very expensive to implement. So an example I like to use for this is like a public school. If we're talking about like an elementary school and a third grader or something uses a wheelchair and the building was built before the ADA, so it does not have an elevator, it would be a little unreasonable to expect a public school system to put in an elevator like real quick over the summer because that's disruptive and it's very expensive. So a more of a reasonable accommodation for that would be to move the third grade classroom down to the first floor. But if we're talking about high school where there's lots of kind of movement between classes, then it might be a little more reasonable to expect an elevator in there. So there's the kind of lots of nuance and discussion with accommodations. And then what does undue hardship mean? I kind of already talked about this. It's an accommodation that's too costly or extensive or disruptive. And if something is found to be undue hardship, then the employer is not required to provide the requested accommodation. Just so you all kind of know the history and the laws about accommodations. Now let's talk about what equal versus equitable means. Equal support literally means everyone gets the same resources, rules, and opportunities, but this assumes that fairness equals sameness. And for example, giving every employee the exact same kind of chair, the same start time, the same workflow expectations, that is equal support, but it doesn't really account for barriers and needs or lived experience. So it can unintentionally favor those who already have advantages. Equitable support, on the other hand, everyone gets the resources and adjustments that they need to succeed. And this focuses on fair outcomes rather than identical treatment. And an example to kind of counter the equal example, providing different chair options, flexible schedules, and offering instructions in multiple forms of communication. And I do get a lot of questions about this flexible schedules thing. And one of the kind of most, I guess, feasible thing I've seen for this, especially if we're talking about an in-person workplace, is I've seen workplaces do like everyone has to be in the office at least between 11 and 3. But then to fill in the rest of your 8 hours, you can come in early or you can stay late, or maybe you can go home and do the rest of your work during that time. So that kind of offers that flexibility without trying to kind of work through everyone's completely different schedules, if that makes sense. And so just as like a kind of very general overview of equal versus equitable, equal, an example is everyone gets the same size shoe, but equitable, everyone gets the shoe that fits their feet. So like I've said, equal kind of on its surface may seem like it might be okay for everyone, but it doesn't kind of account for our differences, our sensory preferences, our needs, the way that we succeed in the workplace. But equitable, we kind of can tailor an experience for each employee. So I'll go over some examples. Staff meetings scheduled for 8 a.m. Eastern every single time. Equal is everyone must attend in person. Equitable, we can offer remote or recorded options. And like I mentioned, we'll get into kind of managing fairness in a minute. Training materials, an equal support is that they're only offered verbally. Equitable is offering captions, transcripts, and visual aids. And then especially, I like kind of recordings, but I specifically like a platform that lets me speed up or slow down the playback. It is really difficult for me to concentrate when something is really slow. I listen to things at like 2.5 times speed, and that is how I concentrate. And so that's important to me. But then I know like my husband, he likes listening to stuff at like 0.5 speed, and that's how he concentrates. And so that's kind of another example of equitable support there. Deadlines equals everyone has the same rigid deadlines. Equitable is we have flexible deadlines. And again, I know this kind of seems like it might be a little unfair, so we're going to talk about the fairness here in a second. Equity, just as a kind of a overarching kind of idea here, equity removes barriers that prevent people from accessing the same opportunities. It builds trust and it builds belonging, and it increases productivity, while equality alone can kind of reinforce those existing inequalities that equity kind of takes care of. So right here, I am going to stop sharing my screen just for a little bit, but I will come back to it. But right now, I am going to ask, I'll ask Glenn first to share a couple personal examples of the kind of supports that he uses that allow him to be successful in the workplace. Or Glenn, I know you have some negative examples that you love talking about too. So you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I just wanted to share some personal stuff here.
All right. So for me, some of my past workplaces have been I worked in the journalism field for about 6 years. And then from there, I moved into working at a trade school organization Um, and while they both had their share of challenges, journalism in particular has very, very tight deadlines. And I know for me, it was a very anxiety-provoking job. One of the things I've noticed is that um, for me, one of the things that I think helps a lot is I like to have I have a lot of sensory sensitivities as part of my autism. So like if I have fluorescent lights going on above me, it's bad. I will wind up with a headache. It'll be distracting. I can't focus. I feel the whole day just a little bit mildly, quietly overwhelmed. And you can push through that, but like shouldn't have to. Um, so in the past, where I've struggled is that sometimes people aren't willing to make those accommodations. Sometimes you struggle to find workplaces that are willing to do that. But sometimes it's honestly rather simple to make those. You can just put covers over the lights. I personally almost always carry a pair of headphones around with me whenever I go out because music helps me concentrate, but not everyone has my tastes, so I'll put in a pair of headphones and just turn it on and keep one headphone in so that I can still hear if someone's talking to me, but I can still concentrate. Um, at the same job where I was at the trade school, though, there were a lot of situations where I found that the accessibility could have used a lot of work. For example, we were in a one of our major buildings on campus was a historic building, um, and the director's office was on the second floor, which had these particularly steep flights of stairs. We had one member of our staff who was a wheelchair user, and another who had I don't remember exactly what it was, but he struggled to walk. Um, so oftentimes he talked a lot about how brutal the staircase was on him. And like that right there could be defined as a major accessibility issue. And it's simple enough to fix. You either move the director's office to a different location or you you move the director's office to a different location, you have him come to these people when he has to meet with them. Like, I think it's easy to get caught up in, we have to take these specific steps to remedy this problem, and there's just no way to do that. In this case, like, I think they were legally barred from making modifications to the building as a historic site. But there are a lot of other ways around it. It doesn't have to be complicated. Um, and I guess the last note I'll make is that a lot of this does have to come from a cultural perspective of wanting to actually solve these problems. And it's a bit of an uphill battle if you work in a place where there is a culture of not wanting to do that. I remember that I actually got called a slur a couple times at that previous workplace I was at, and oftentimes that sort of environment made it feel very nerve-wracking to ask for accommodations because if they're not willing to respect, basic language preferences of please don't use this word that is considered a slur by most major disability advocates, um, how can you expect them to do something as simple? How can you expect them to do anything that, actually would require expense or work? So I think a big part of making accommodations work is ensuring that you have a culture that signals we are willing to accommodate and we are willing to take you seriously. And I think that honestly, a big part of that is, I think a lot of people do fear that they won't be taken seriously if they ask for something. I know for me, a common issue from an autistic perspective is being treated like a child or being treated like I'm not mature enough to make my own decisions or like I am just complaining about something that everyone experiences. So I think that that is where hearing a lot of diverse perspectives and hearing from people with a lot of different experiences really helps. And having people who have had those experience in positions where they get to make decisions and influence those sorts of viewpoints also helps because, it's real. It's really happens. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on things.
Yeah, yeah. And there was a couple of things that I wanted to kind of touch on there. I know, Glenn, you started talking about the elevator, and I wanted to go back to the exa or the lack of an elevator. I wanted to go back to my example of the elementary school, and I meant to say this, that I do still think it might behoove the elementary school to kind of make it a goal to implement an elevator just because it isn't necessarily required by law that they do that. That's sort of that attitudinal barrier that why it might be way too expensive and kind of in the moment to build an elevator real quick. But that doesn't mean that's not something that we can't work towards. And I think that's kind of where we get a lot of lost time, a lot of times where we're just like, oh, that's not necessary. Let's just move on and never think about it again.
Mm.
And then another thing I wanted to talk about kind of within the attitudinal barrier thing, and the lights, and this is kind of a difference that Glenn and I have. I love light. I want to turn on all the lights. I want to open the windows. And so when we work together, there's times where like we find a kind of a compromise and a balance there. And that's just something that we've worked together to manage. And but we've never gotten in an argument about it. And I think that's kind of the attitudinal barrier thing. And Glenn, because you have that experience, I know you talk about your glasses a lot that you wear. And I think that can honestly, I mean, I don't want to speak for you. You can let me know if I'm wrong, but I'm sure some people they might not know what they are or why you're wearing them, and they might see that as like a sign of disrespect for wearing sunglasses inside. And
Yeah.
that again is an attitudinal barrier that we're kind of putting up ourselves. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about your glasses at all right now,
Yeah,
or
I can talk about that a bit. So one of the things I started doing at this previous job was I bought a pair of tinted glasses. They're kind of like rose pink tinted that are designed to cut out some of the harsher glare that you get from bright lights. And those, it's not a perfect solution. And I think that, when the option exists and when it doesn't conflict with someone else's sensory needs, I think that the best solution is to just let me let me have my little cavern of desk lamps. But in cases where that's not an option, I often wear them when I'm grocery shopping or something like that. I'll have these glasses. Now, Haley, you mentioned that there might be times when, people get weird about it. People do definitely get weird about it. I have gotten at least a few jokes at the expense, and well, I'm autistic, so not the best at reading social situations, but who knows what else people have thought. And definitely there have been times when people have reacted strangely to them. And and in that way, that attitudinal barrier also causes its own problems too. There's an example I give quite often of, if I get pulled over or have to do a job interview, the expectation is I do eye contact. And if I do not do eye contact, things could go very badly. Police might see that as a sign of dishonesty. A potential employer might see that as a sign of disrespect. So even if I am in every way equal to another job applicant, same experience, same level of skill, I give an interview of the same quality. The fact that I am not making eye contact could cost me the job. So I have to devote extra brain processing to remember, stare at their eyes, stare at their eyes. Okay, that's too much. Look away, look away. You're being weird. That's too much. Okay, look at them again. And that becomes its own barrier in its own way. So you kind of wind up in a way almost preemptively creating your own barriers simply because you expect them to be there, if that makes sense. It's almost self-fulfilling prophecy sort of thing. But likewise, those barriers are very real, and I know multiple times where, the fact that I don't make eye contact has been an issue. I remember that there was one specific instance where I was back when I was doing journalism, where I had someone I was interviewing actually give me unsolicited advice on it. Like I was just finishing up the interview, and the person I was talking to said, "Now, I'm going to give you some advice. Make some. You did a great job, but I need you to make more eye contact. You should make more eye contact." And my reaction to that was just saying, "Ma'am, I have autism," and leaving, which felt very satisfying in the moment, but I feel confident in saying things like that because I have a long history of being told things like that and have developed a thick skin for it. And I'm rambling a little bit, but I feel like there's also something to be said for just the damage it does to your self-esteem having been treated as other for such a long time to the point where you accommodate others almost unconsciously, and the damage it can do to your sense of self to not feel like your needs are ever accounted for. But I'm rambling a little bit. But yeah, the thing is that there is that attitudinal barrier. There is that sense of, if I ask for this, it'll be weird. If I do this, people won't respect it. If I work in this way, if I use this accommodation, people will judge me. And that prevents you from even asking for it in the first place.
Yeah, yeah. And I think something to be said here as well is I don't think a lot of people think about is that our sensory preferences and our accommodations can change within the hour, you know? And something that like I talked about light with Glenn, and I just remember this time where we were working on a project together, the Disabled Playwrights Workshop. And I was like kind of an administrator for that and kind of doing the behind the scenes thing. And Glenn was our stage direction reader. So when we got there for our first rehearsal, I had to do a ton of setup and I was working with paper and I had to like fill out a bunch of forms real quick and highlight and staple and blah, 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 blah. And like I said, I really need a lot of light to focus. And so I was like, can I turn the lights on real quick and get this stuff done? And then when it was Glenn's time to kind of be the one that was in focus with reading and stuff, we turned the lights off and we had we still like accommodations can change, like I said, quickly like that. And I think just being able to kind of have those conversations amongst us is what I think might arguably be the most important. So yeah, I think I'll let Bailey talk a little bit now about her kind of personal examples. If you want to go ahead, Bailey.
Yeah, of course. You all really hit the nail on the head. A lot of accommodations, at least in my experience, involve just granting someone permission to do something that is not normally like a norm within the workplace. HDI has been so flexible and it's kind of built in a structure that allows disabled workers to thrive. So when I am thinking of workplaces that something had to change for me to be able to work there, I have to kind of think in different environments. So I'm thinking about my experience as a working actor in the theater, which is kind of a different environment, but it's still an environment where people need workplace accommodations. One of the accommodations that I normally have to get, and this is such a small thing, is the permission to be able to chew gum. If you think about it, like in a lot of theaters, it's a very like strict norm that you don't want people chewing gum because like it gets underneath seats, it gets in all these kinds of places. So it's really normal for a theater to require that no gum is allowed to be chewed, but chewing gum is something I can use to accommodate myself for panic attacks, and so that's something that I always ask permission for. And it doesn't cost anyone any money. It doesn't it doesn't require that anyone do any extra work, but it just requires us to kind of break a norm. And then thinking about accommodations do sometimes cost money and cost resources, but a lot of times those accommodations can end up being helpful for everyone. In like the disability world, we observe something called the curb cut effect, where if you end up helping a disabled person, you probably end up implementing something that helps everyone in the long run. So my example of that is that once during a tech week run, which is the amount of time that comes right before performance, it's the crunch time for us in the theater. I was unwell and I had to leave the stage in the middle of a dress rehearsal. And at that point, dress rehearsals are really serious. You're supposed to treat them like the show. So instead of me getting fired or me being asked to leave the show, they actually implemented a policy where they would have a walk-on understudy ready for emergencies. And I didn't end up needing it for the run of that show or any show to date, but other people have ended up needing it for non-disability related reasons, for weather, other emergencies. So when you use your accommodations to help disabled people, and you restructure and you rethink things, you end up helping everyone in the long run.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about that a little bit. I have some visuals for the curb cut effect that Bailey talked about. And just like I'm not going to get too into it right now because we'll talk about it a little bit later, but that's kind of what we call universal design. And the key there is universal. It's for everyone. And I really like kind of being strict on the difference in universal design and accessibility. Because to me, accessibility is almost you have to change something to make it accessible. So like implementing or spending money on and building like this ramp that is in the back of the building that you have to go searching for, that, like only people that quote unquote need it will look for it. But with universal design, it's as usable as possible by as many people as possible at the same time. So it avoids that segregation. It a lot of times, like Bailey said, makes things better for everyone. But as a designer, as I have a background in graphic design, it a lot of times is just designed better and it looks better and you can interact with it easier and you almost don't even notice it, which I think is that's kind of the beauty of good design, is that you don't really notice it, but you do notice when there's bad design. Like I would notice if I broke my leg and I notice where there is no ramps anywhere for me. But if there was ramps everywhere, then I wouldn't really notice that kind of thing. So I know that was kind of like a little bit of a offshoot there for a moment, but we'll get back into the actual scheduled presentation now. But I do want to talk about managing fairness, because I think this kind of gets misconstrued a lot of times with people without disabilities. They can see some things like these accommodations as being unfair, but like Bailey said, a lot of them make things better for everyone. And so I've got the example of like the staff meeting scheduled for 8 a.m. and having that equity of offering remote or recorded options. And fairness is that we could offer these to everyone, and this can just kind of be what we are normalizing as accessibility. But the big thing is communicating expectations clearly. And if we want to go further, we can rotate meeting times and dates, and just kind of to balance convenience for everyone, because we all have different things that we've got going on in our lives that can prevent us from being there at 8 a.m. and being our best self. I think that's kind of important there too. I'm far from my best self at 8 a.m. And I could go to a meeting at 8 a.m., but I would not enjoy it. And so, I mean, sure, if I have to go to a meeting at 8 a.m. every once in a while, fine. But like I very much appreciate kind of changing the meeting times, like our monthly all staff meeting, for example. We kind of switcheroo it up a little bit to balance that convenience. The training materials, like I mentioned, having captions and transcripts and visual aids, and managing fairness. This can be ensuring that all of these formats are available to everyone and not just people who request them. And this normalizes accessibility, like I mentioned. But it's okay. Like, we want to still encourage requests, that kind of thing, but it doesn't necessarily, like, we can just kind of set that as a general expectation as an employer. Deadlines, the flexible deadlines, again, offering this to everyone. That's kind of a theme within universal design. And especially focusing on outcomes and not identical processes that may not be necessary every time. And then this is a new one, the workplace setups. Equal, I did mention this at the beginning, standard desk and chair for everyone. Equity is offering different kinds of seating, desks, adaptive equipment as needed. But fairness, like I said again, this can be offered to anyone. Communication, equal could be all feedback is given verbally in meetings. Equity could be providing written follow-ups or asynchronous options, so like videos, like I said, writing, or you could take notes or something as a supervisor or let someone take notes themselves. That goes back kind of to the eye contact thing that Glenn was talking about. I really appreciate my handwriting, and like handwriting my notes in a notebook. And so a lot of times I'm like looking down in meetings, and you'll only see the top of my head or something. And so just like that's an accommodation itself, knowing that that's my kind of communication preferences through writing, that sort of thing. And then fairness, once again, applying the same courtesy to everyone, offering multiple ways to give and receive communication. And then this is the curb cut effect that Bailey was talking about in a more introduction to universal design. Because I think a lot of people think accommodations are really only beneficial to people with disabilities. But if we look at it, if we talk about a curb cut, now I'm not sure everyone's kind of background in universal design, so I hope I'm not kind of going into something that you're already aware of. But I'll try to give like a overview of it. But a curb cut are the kind of dips in sidewalks that were originally implemented for wheelchair users, so that they could get on and off of a sidewalk easily or cross the street even. And this was led by a person, I believe he was like a military veteran, and used a wheelchair. And he kind of like championed the whole idea of curb cuts. But then we started noticing that, like we've been saying, it benefits everyone. It benefits people that have strollers or a suitcase or a bike or a skateboard, or they're pushing a cart, that kind of thing. And I think that's kind of like a very kind of intro into universal design. Like I said, I'm not going to go too into it beyond this, but I just kind of want you all to start thinking about those things that may be implemented specifically for disabled people that have become kind of our norm and have influenced and improved the lives of everyone. And I do want to say this, because I think this kind of also is kind of misconstrued a lot of times, that offering accommodations does not mean holding people with disabilities to a lower standard. And Glenn kind of talked about this a little bit, about kind of being treated like he's a child. And this is not what we want. We do not, like, first of all, disabled people don't need that. They're in their job for a reason. You know, they have an expertise, they have knowledge, they have a background that is valuable and important. But I think something that gets lost a lot of times is communicating those expectations clearly is the most important part. A lot of people don't want to offend someone for whatever reason, or I don't know, they just don't maybe not have a lot of experience communicating and working with people with disabilities. And so they, like I said, are just kind of worried about offending them, and so they don't communicate those expectations. And if you don't communicate those expectations, then no one can reach them. And so I think that's kind of the key takeaway for me, is communicating those expectations to everyone. and kind of focusing on those outcomes instead of identical kind of methods and getting there. And thinking about what we see as accommodations, and that they can be as little as allowing someone to wear sunglasses to saving up a bunch of money to implement an elevator or fidgets. I mean, that's a big thing for me is just allowing fidgets. And then, but there's like, there's some places, some fidgets can be really noisy. And so that might not be like a super awesome kind of fidget to allow in maybe a quiet workspace or like a library or something. But that's just, again, like kind of finding a balance. I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I really like this idea of like found fidgets, and using things as fidgets that aren't necessarily supposed to be as fidgets, used as fidgets. My favorite ones are hair barrettes. I snap them. I'm actually snapping one right now. I don't know if you can see it, but it's like a hair barrette that's wrapped in yarn. And my other favorite one, and again, I'm just doing this so y'all can kind of think about how you already kind of use accommodations maybe without thinking. But my other favorite thing are these mini M&M containers that I squeeze open. And this would be very noisy. I don't know if you can hear the noise, but it would be way too noisy in a workplace. But these barrettes aren't too bad. So I guess I'm just trying to talk about compromise and not seeing those accommodations as something that is kind of a burden for you. And thinking about your own sensory preferences and thinking about what you do in the workplace to kind of build success. So if you do have any questions about universal design or workplace accommodations, you can contact me. And like I said, we've got 20 minutes left, I believe, so we'll have some more conversation, but I did want to go ahead and give my contact info there. And then if you want to learn more about HDI, you can visit us at hdi.uky.edu. We do have a bunch of information about universal design. We have an undergraduate certificate in universal design that I think is really beneficial. And yeah, I think that's all I have before I get into talking more with you all and having more of a conversation. But I do want to ask if you have any questions right now. And while we're waiting to see if we have any questions in the chat, Bailey or Glenn, do you have anything you want to add? Or if you have anything you want to correct me on, don't be shy.
I'll say like I really like the idea that you mentioned about everyone being able to, think of ways that they can kind of accommodate themselves in their workplace without even creating any kind of formal process. I mean, I know it's different if you work in person or if you work virtually, but since I work virtually, I make it a part of my, work day to really make sure that I am in the best space to be able to do my best work. And I make sure I have something to listen to if I'm writing, like some soothing music, and I make sure that the lights aren't too bright, and I make sure I'm, just in a comfy spot, and I have, access to like water or a beverage like coffee next to me. And like those are really simple ways that everyone can make sure that they are doing their best work without really changing anything. Oh, my cat wants to say hi. Without really changing anything formally. But we all, work is really about like creating a product or an outcome, and the amount of people in this world, there are billions of us, and we're each like very unique people with our own needs and preferences. So really, if you think about it, there are billions of different ways to achieve an outcome and get something done. So it's really just about embracing embracing different ways of getting something done, and that includes you, even if you're not disabled.
Mhm. That was also something I was thinking about commenting on was the idea of accommodating yourself. I think people would be shocked to know how often people with disabilities just do that. Like, that's honestly one of the things that watching a lot of autistic characters on TV or in movies, one of the things that really consistently bugs me is you're telling me this person is 17 years old and they still haven't figured out how to navigate some of these issues. By that age, most of the autistic people I know have at least some kind of coping mechanism to help handle this sort of thing and to help them exist in a world that is oftentimes uncomfortable. So that was something that I really like to point out is that, like, yeah, oftentimes we come up with our own strategies to help ourselves work best and help ourselves, feel most comfortable in our environments. And I think that's another reason that listening to disabled people about their own needs is valuable.
Yeah, and I think a big thing that we can do as employers is encouraging people to ask for accommodations or talk about their sensory preferences or even just to think about them. I think a lot of times, whether we're disabled or not, we just kind of are like, oh, well, this is what my workplace is like, and that's how it is. And especially if we're discouraged, even if especially if we've been discouraged our entire lives, not even just in that workplace. And like an example I have for that is, like I said, I like a lot of light. So I bring in lots of lamps to add more light. And there was this one time where I brought in all my lamps for my new in-person workplace. And I wasn't working one of the days. And one of my, like when I came back to work after like my vacation or whatever, my coworker that worked in the same office space, she was like, I'm so glad you brought in all those lamps because I've been having all these migraines recently and I never thought to bring in a lamp, and I realized that like it's the overhead lights that are contributing to my migraines. And so like I was just surprised that she had never thought to bring in those lamps, but I'm sure part of that might be because she was discouraged to do that or wasn't even, I don't know, like a workplace can also provide lamps. You can talk to your workplace about those kinds of things. And I'm sure that we have all kinds of lamps at UK if we want to too. I don't want to speak definitely on that. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not totally sure. But that is something that like I'm just trying to say about as supervisors is that encouraging other people to kind of talk about this. Um, yeah. Um, if there isn't, if there aren't any questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, if that is okay. And I'm going to get all of my notes ready because I do want to hear from you all a little bit more. I know we've got some stuff going on in the chat, but I wanted to ask, and then of course, Bailey or Glenn, feel free to answer. I know you've already talked about a couple of these things already, but what about, I want you to think about when you didn't have a lot of resources, what did you do to ensure your success? How did you still succeed? And I can put the text in chat.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm also with HDI, and I was thinking about I've been thinking about a lot of things during the course of this conversation, but not always having the resources includes not always having support, like you were talking about. And I actually worked for an agency, a provider agency that provided services and supports for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I worked best early in the morning in the quiet, and we did not have flexible schedules. We worked in an open air office. That's how it was. And you just worked as long as it took to get your job done. So I would go to work often between 5 and 6 in the morning so I could actually accomplish things, but still had to stay through the end of the day because that was the expectation. is that you would be there. And so, but I had to, it wasn't a good kind of thing I had to do to get up that early to go to work, to be by myself, and then work that long day. But that's what I did without the resources and the support. But when I ended up eventually, I had a job. I live in Louisville. And I had a job in Frankfurt working for state government. And I did have support. And so I was able to, between my need to get up and work in the quiet, and the lights wouldn't come on yet, so I would have my lamp on and that kind of thing, to also my anxiety about rush hour traffic, leaving and coming in the afternoons. I was able to leave Louisville and start my workday pretty early in Frankfurt to get out of Louisville before rush hour, and then I would be able to leave Frankfurt hour or two before everybody else. I would be there during the bulk of the day. But then, if something came up, I was in a leadership position. I, of course, would answer a phone or email later, but I was really able to shorten that workday into a normal work type hours because I had that support. But when I didn't, I just had to work the long hours, if that makes sense. So it wasn't necessarily a good thing, but to succeed, I had to sometimes, work extra. And I was really excited when I finally had people that understood. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something I work with Elizabeth a lot, for y'all that don't know. And that's something that we kind of navigate together. Like Elizabeth said, she likes starting work at 5 a.m. and I gear up in my brain and my kind of what is that, like what's that word? Like, for you're efficient in your job, I guess. Like, I gear up at like 4 p.m. So that's when I kind of get my most of my work done, is like the 4 to 7 p.m. kind of time range. And so we kind of like, we know that about each other. And so there's lots of times where I I get messages from Elizabeth early in the morning, or maybe she schedules them to they'll be delivered to me later, or something like that. And she just kind of knows that I'm more of a late person, and then I know that she's more of an early person, so I know when I message her at 4:30, I might not get an answer right away, kind of thing. And that kind of goes back to that kind of attitudinal thing, and just working together in general and being flexible. Hopefully that made sense. I know I kind of was a little bit rambling. Did that make sense, Elizabeth?
It did make sense. And even like, I'm not somebody who tags people a lot
Yeah.
in Teams, but because our work schedules are off, I tag Haley sometimes if there's something that's going to need an answer, so that it shows up in her notifications whenever she does log on, and it doesn't get lost in whatever anybody else did during the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Anyone else have anything to say about that first question?
I know for me, like, I think that having the ability to find like a moment of peace in the middle of a hectic and busy time helped a lot. And this was especially something I did at my last job where, I had an hour lunch break and I would use that hour lunch break to always eat my lunch, and then I would spend the rest of it reading. And if you call me on the phone during that hour lunch break, I am, I will answer it, and then I will go right back to my lunch break, and I will take the time and I was working for that time I was on the phone, so I am adding that 5 minutes or whatever to my lunch break because I need that moment of quiet away from everything, uh, with some privacy and the ability to just zone out and do my own thing, um, because I need that day kind of broken up. And even though I often found that workplace very stressful and very unaccommodating, having that moment of peace helped a lot.
Yeah. And Glenn, you were talking about kind of accommodating for yourself and how you've navigated that. And I think I find myself doing that a lot of times just as an introvert. I mean, I get really drained after a presentation or a meeting. And so I have learned to kind of build in like 30 minutes or whatever after a particularly stressful presentation. Maybe I might have like 10 minutes or something sometimes, but if it's particularly stressful, I know to build in some cool down time for me to do whatever I need to do, whether it's and I have more flexibility in doing what I want to do, being work from home. Like I like playing my oboe. I play the oboe, so I like doing that after like something stressful, or I dance. So I like dancing, and I haven't really had an in-person workplace that dances that acceptable. Like it would be a little surprising, I suppose, but not totally um against the rules, I guess is the right word. I don't know if I would be comfortable dancing in an in-person place, but I do that working from home, just to share some personal, I guess. And but like when I do work in in-person, I just can close my door to my office for a little bit, and people know that I'm taking a break or something, or go to my car for a little bit, or go on a walk or something like that. So just kind of building in time for myself.
Also, on the subject of found fidgets,
Yeah.
those can be really, really helpful too. And some of my favorites are I have a pocket watch here at my desk. I have a couple decks of cards, and I have some dice. And those are really good fidgets for me.
hmm Yeah. I have a lot. Like, if you look at my desk, I have lots of seemingly random things that are fidgets to me. Like, I have these, like, cuticle clippers, and I just squeeze them all day long. Or, like, I've got like it's not super squishy, but like another kind of squeezing thing. It's just like a little manatee guy. So those kinds of things. Uh, and yeah, I don't want to go over, so if it's okay with everyone, I'll ask one more question that hopefully kind of encompasses everything. But to you, how can accommodating one person benefit everyone? I know we talked about this a little bit already, but I want to see if anyone has any additional thoughts.
Well, I don't want to dominate. I was waiting to see anybody else talk. But I think that I think when Glenn, somebody put in the chat, it can encourage others to pursue them, and that's right. When we were talking about the culture, Glenn talked about that and creating that culture where people are comfortable and people feel like they'll be heard and respected. And I've historically haven't asked for accommodations. I've just done things to make work for me. And I've often heard, often through other people, that like people that were in supervisory positions, and I usually was in a leadership role, but people above me would say, oh, she's so weird. I would hear often how weird I am. And I just learned to wear that, like, okay, that gives other people permission to be, quote, weird too. And so they can, if there's something that they needed, then people got really comfortable. I had a coworker who would come in and just sort of on Haley's Dance. This was in person in state government. Come in and break out in uh, a show tune, if you will, to express her emotions in the moment, or that kind of thing. I think just creating that culture that it's okay just to be who you are. You don't have to change, and it's just little things that we can do to just be comfortable, and it just kind of makes it interesting. If you just people just be, it can be a really interesting and fun place to work, where you see just many different ways that people handle things, and you can learn other ways that you can handle your day too.
And
Yeah,
it is a
yeah.
badge of honor for me personally.
Yeah, I was gonna say anytime I'm like in a new space and someone else is quote unquote weird, I feel this sense of relief. I'm like, okay, I can be weird now. And sometimes, I guess I break that tension a little bit, and like Elizabeth, you were talking about the singing. And I did not realize how much I just break out into song until I started recording myself, like presenting or whatever, and the amount of stuff I have to edit out of me just breaking out into song. I was like, oh wow, I've never noticed that about myself. And like I mentioned that to someone, they were like, "Yeah, you just sing like all the time. It's nice." Like you said, it's just they know that that's also like kind of a signal of how I'm feeling. Like if I'm not singing, I'm not having a good day, you know? And like, or like if I am singing, it's like if I haven't sung for like, I don't know, a couple weeks or something, and I'm like kind of in a slump or something, and I've started singing, and like my husband will be like, "Oh, you're singing again. You must be in a good mood." And so that kind of thing, just kind of recognizing those kinds of things in others. But
I was
I don't.
also
Oh, go ahead. You go.
I was also thinking about flexibility in working hours and thinking about my sister who has, I think he's 3 now, has a 3-year-old son, and like there is a lot required of her for childcare, and I think that for parents especially, like it's good to have flexible work hours for me. That is something that is helpful to me. That is something that is a really good accommodation. I think it's an even better accommodation for my sister and her son, who the baby needs to be fed, the baby needs to be taken care of. Flexible work hours help with that. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's like there's a lot of very basic, small, slight accommodations that I think really help out in ways that people don't foresee.
Yeah, definitely. All right. We are at 1 o'clock, so I don't want to hold you all any longer. I am going to put my email in the chat in case you do have any questions about universal design or accommodations, or if you want to reach out to Glenn or Bailey, I will get you in contact with them. I have the HDI website there as well. But yeah, I'll stay on for a couple minutes in case anyone has anything else to say, but other than that, I'll let everyone go.